Good afternoon, colleagues. My approach to research was slightly different. I decided to make use of RIPE Atlas. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with this system. If you don't have any experience with RIPE Atlas yet, I highly recommend that you look into it. If you want to learn more from the horse's mouth, you can always find me during the coffee breaks. So let's get started. There are several studies for round trip time, RTT. And RTT consists of several components. One of them is latency in the fiber. The speed of light is it has a limit. So RTT depends on the latency in the fiber. The second component is a latency on the hardware. The signal is received. It must be converted into a packet. It takes some time. And the third component is queues or query delays, overloading of the link. Well, here comes the animation with a latency. The most famous research on this topic is from Stanford University. They measured RTT depending on the distance. They built charts like this. They used a linear formula that explains how round-trip time depends on the distance. If I remember correctly, those researchers used 7 probes only. And I decided to use our Atlas system to see whether we'll see any different results. How can RTT depend on the distance? We understand that light propagates in a fiber. In every segment of fiber, there is its own latency. The speed of light changes between segments. I mean, it doesn't change, but the latency changes between the segments. And there are fluctuations in those latencies depending on the type of fiber, the age of fiber. However, that speed variation is within a 10% limit. And the third latency depends on time and on the circumstances. I remember the times when 24 hours a day, the latency continued and the links were constantly overloaded. But those days are gone. If you look at the minimal value, and today there are minimal values, and quite often this third component becomes nil. We can get rid of this last latency by adjusting our network. So we are left with only hardware latency. The researchers from this college measured a 6 millisecond latency without the modern ASICs. I think it's something that had to be expected, but we can say today that our RTT is in proportion to total distance and the length of the fiber. I think there should be a good correlation between RTT and actual length of the fiber. So how does Atlas enter this picture? Well, Atlas has a lot of probes on this map. You could see how these probes are distributed across the country. There are about 500 probes in Russia. Most of them are in big cities. So we can measure RTT, the latency and the distances between all these probes. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, I thought it shouldn't be too difficult. And then it turned out that I had to invest much more time than I expected into this research. And how can I go back? Right. And this research was not included into the Russian report, just because I didn't finish it on time. I didn't use any in-depth special access to the hardware. I didn't use any special features. I don't even know if they exist. I carried out this research just like any of you would have done it. It's just that I had to engage the services of the team that designed Atlas. And every other researcher who wants to repeat this exercise will have to do the same. You should take precautions in order not to put the system to bad use, in order not to use it, for the evil. But the Atlas team loves when researchers come to them with their plans and proposals. We wrote about 3,000 lines on Python. We used our library. At RIPE NCC, we had to include 5 new classes to the library, though we also identified certain errors. And I found those errors, and because I found them, it means that you didn't find them, and it means that if I could find them, it was something on the surface, and anyone could have found them before. It's just that it looks like this system is heavily underused. Please take another look at the system. Maybe you will find it attractive and begin employing it with greater enthusiasm. When I started selecting the points and when I started building the one-to-one pictures, I decided to limit my research with 30 cities. I needed 30 cities because I needed Vladivostok and Khabarovsk, 2 big cities in the far east of Russia. So when I built a list of top 30 cities, I saw that in the big Russian cities, there are very few probes. In Ufa, only 2 probes. Makhachkala, I had to remove it from the list because it didn't have a single probe. Anyway, I had to do something about it. Even if there are agglomerate cities like Samara and Telyati are 2 different cities, but they can be seen as one cluster, as an agglomerate. Still, I didn't have enough probes. I considered that round trip from A to B is the same as a round trip from B to A. And if we have some number of Atlas probes, we can add additional nodes to achieve our purpose if we understand the geolocalization clearly. I selected those nodes. It required a lot of manual work. I had to test 450 nodes. I had to control for the quality of the data that they can provide. If a node is in Chelyabinsk, or if it's in Irkutsk, or in St. Petersburg, I needed to make sure that those nodes were truly in those locations. So I ended up with 310 probes in 29 cities and 760 targets in total. When I did the measurements at every stage, I also verified the results of those measurements. I had to cross-verify the data. I need to make sure that all results matched. I continued the process of verification until the number of failures or false positive results or negative results became 0. There was one probe that pinged itself between 5 to 10 milliseconds. I still don't understand what happened to this probe, why it took it so long to respond to itself. There were other sites that looked like excellent candidates for local points. They belong to the tax inspectorates, and every tax inspectorate is in a particular region. But it turned out that all of them had a fixed latency of 20 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds sharp. Most likely, this can be explained through some kind of a DDoS platform, or anti-DDoS platform. So I had to filter all our measurements for those weird latencies. And there were other surprises like this. We don't have time to go into the details, but when we collected all the results, and we got minimal results for every couple, for every pair of IP addresses, we wanted to understand the round-trip time between two groups of addresses. We wanted the statistics. So I selected the minimal value between those two groups and the median value for those two groups as two statistical values. Median is not the same as average. A median, you look at the either middle or average value depending on how many elements you have in the sum, an even number or an odd number. You can't trick the speed of light, and it works for you for small values, but in case of big values, you can't explain everything with the speed of light, and the median value will do a better job than the average. The first verification, an autonomous system inside the city. Everything is local, one city inside the city. I will look at the autonomous systems who are residents of this city. The minimal RTT is 71. We received 71 results. Going back to D2 value, D2 can be taken to be 0. And this is a proof to the correctness of my hypothesis. But there is a city of Tomsk. Tomsk has an office of Rostelecom Siberia. They have two prefixes. And between these two prefixes, the median ping is 13 milliseconds. We don't know why this is happening. We tested it again after we've seen this result. It's not a fault of the measurement. It is a fact. Inside the cities, not inside an autonomous system, but inside a city, there are two options. Either we compare IP addresses or we compare different ASs. And IP addresses, well, that depends on the users. They are distributed more or less evenly between operators. And autonomous system perspective will give us a better understanding of connectivity. So we've got those charts. And that's how it looks like. And the conclusions are, generally speaking, the situation in Russia is quite okay. The minimal round trip is minimal. It's very small. Between the autonomous systems, the round trip is not perfect, but it's good. In only one case, we registered more than 25 milliseconds, and it's always below 50 milliseconds, which is our sacred value. However, there is still room for improvement, especially in such places as Ufa. Ufa has a local XP, and you might think that they should have already resolved this problem, but so far they've done nothing. And the last part of this research, between the cities, and this is the last formula in this presentation, if the speed inside the fiber is 200 kilometers per millisecond, it should be kilometers over milliseconds, not the other way around. Then the S value should be around 1. If the fiber is absolutely smooth and it runs between point A, point B without any deviations. If the returned value is higher than 1, it means that this fiber goes in twists and turns. Again, less than 2, okay, and most of this field is okay, apart from the apart from the red dots. The median RTT between the cities is not looking good. And maybe this picture doesn't tell you much, but to put it into plain Russian, it turns out that on average connectivity between the Russian cities is okay, however, not without pathologies. There are certain cities, they are in the red here, with the worst performance. And if you take a close look at this list, and if you remember geography from your school classes, I think you already understand what I'm driving at, but for those of you who are not familiar with the Russian geography, this is a list of cities inside the central Volga Federal District. It's central Russia. This is the Volga Federal District. The problems are all there, as if by miracle. It's a wonder. There are 2 explanations for this regional anomaly. You can explain it through politics and, I don't know, administrative, whatever. Maybe it's the legacy, historic legacy of this region. Or maybe it's because of the geography, the actual geography. Because the district is called the Volga Federal District, those cities lie on the banks of this huge river. And maybe there are some problems with laying the cables across the Volga River. It's one of the biggest rivers in Europe, and I don't know. I don't know what the explanation should be. But that's the 2 hypotheses that come to mind. And the findings. Atlas is a workable tool in a project of this scale. You do it once, and I don't know if I have time in the future, then I will publish that on GitHub, and this will become available for everybody, and every next iteration will be simpler. I mean, it will be easier done. I ask you to use Atlas. And another finding is that everything is okay inside the cities. The only, again, anomaly and 13 milliseconds, it's not a catastrophe, obviously, but there's just one outlier. And in terms of connectivity between the cities, all our current problems are within the same geographical region. So we can praise the system of cables in Russia. The ad hoc observation of cables in Russia on the data plane shows that we are in good shape. I intend to return to this project. I want to review the data further. I want to optimize the code, automate it maybe, and I want to run this project in other countries as well. And probably I want to turn it into a standing practice, because I would be really curious to see the trend. Excellent, Alex. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for listening.